Hey YouTube, Gordon Miller here. Okay, so since going online again for the first time in a while, yesterday, I've gotten some feedback from some folks that I've been working with. And the one was Tim Wadsworth. So Tim has a company up in Rochester, New York, focusing on real estate. And as you all know, real estate is one of the things I've tried to stay away from, commercial as well as residential. But he's a huge fan, and but he did say that one of the things that I had recommended has really turned out to be a phenomenal benefit for him. And so I thought I'd pass it along. And Tim, if you are watching this and want to comment, I certainly appreciate it. But one of the things I had learned along the way is that one of the ways that you can maximize your success is to minimize your overall expenses. And so and that's a tactic that I've used more recently as I've continued to look for ways to reduce overall operating expenses for things that we've been doing. So, give you an example. So we moved into our office space at G3 back in 2000, and when we did, we had been in another office for several years and had finally gotten first pick, Suite 3000 on the top floor where we were. And we got a generous build-out allowance and things like that. And so we were one of the first tenants in the building. And so the landlord said, hey, we'll give you the building for $500,000 and then we'll manage it for you and collect the rents and everything else if you're interested. And of course, I wasn't really a real estate guy. I mean, I really didn't like real estate. And of course, the land that the buildings were on was owned by the foundation for Virginia Tech. And so I wouldn't own the land. I would own the building, or at least the rights to rent it. So I really wasn't all that, didn't really think that was the best strategy. But of course, we went on to be there for close to 20 years. We ceased operations in that location in August of last year. But it's one of those kind of things where we began to look at that, and I had paid over $1 million in rent in that location. And there were great offices and things like that. We weren't really using all of the space. I mean, we had used it at various times when we had larger projects or a greater number of projects and more employees or fewer employees. But what we had done was we had continued to overpay for rent. And so we had paid basically $1 million in rent over close to 18 years. And that was a huge mistake. I mean, if I had it to do over again, I certainly wouldn't do that. And even my own personal office here in Richmond, I had that office for 15 years, and moving into it in 2004. And I had also paid close to $500,000 in rent, I believe, if I do the math right, in it over the 15 years. So really, in 15 to 20 years, I had put money into $1.5 million in rent. If you look at the fact that you have to generate about 10 times whatever the rent amount is to be able to make rent make sense as a component of overall cost, since labor and benefits and taxes and insurance and a bunch of other stuff is what it is, it became pretty clear to me that if I never had to rent another office space again, I would be fine with that. And there's nothing wrong with offices and things like that, but the technology has come a long way in the last 20 years to allow people to work remotely. I work remotely. This office is one that I have here in my home, and it functions quite well. I also have used recently co-working space. So if I need a large conference room, or I need to get a small conference room or some other things, I get a chance to use that locally. I pay, I don't know, like $25 a month. Maybe it's $40 a month. And then I pay 25 or $40 anytime I need to use the facilities. So I'm only paying for what I use. And I think that's a great strategy. I mean, it's a great strategy to minimize expenses and to maximize profit. I mean, understand that $1.5 million in rent, if we had not spent that in rent, or if we had not had to spend it, that would have been $1.5 million extra in profit. And so that's $1.5 million more that could have been in my pocket or in the pocket of the people that I've worked with. So, but understand that you have to make $10.5 or $15 million in order to get $1.5 million in profit typically. But businesses have between 10 and 20%. So you're talking about between 7.5, 8 million and about $15 million in revenue in order to be able to justify that much rent. And that's just insane. I mean, with today's virtual economy and the ability of people to contract for work and things like that, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I've continued to partner with people who do have employees or do have contractors and things like that. And it's helped me minimize the number of employees that we've needed in order to be able to accomplish certain tasks. And so I really do believe that minimizing expenses, is really the way to get to that. And, you look at how much, vehicles cost. If somebody buys $100,000 or $150,000 company vehicle and if they're leasing it or if they're paying for it over time or whatever, understand that $150,000, even with no interest, represents about $1 million to $1.5 million worth of revenue you have to be able to justify that expense. And I just don't think many people do the calculation like that. Is it really worth an extra $1 million to drive a $150,000 car as opposed to a $50,000 car? You can get a pretty decent car for 50 grand. You can get one that's 3 to 5 years old. That's even a pretty premium vehicle for 50 grand. I actually don't recommend anybody pay more than 50 grand for a car these days. The car I'm driving right now is a 2018 Volkswagen Passat GT V6 performance sedan. And it costs $27,000. So, a far cry from some of the, $150,000 vehicles I've had before. But understand, the reason is that it's not being respectful to the opportunity for the money when you look at it from that standpoint. So you have to make so much more money. So by bringing costs down and focusing on maximizing profit, it allows you to return as much money as you can into the profit category. So, which is really the whole point in the first place. I mean, if you're in business to make a profit. And so Tim was kind enough to reach back out to me and say, hey, look, this strategy of yours really fundamentally changed everything I was thinking about. We were going to rent huge offices and we were going to have lots of employees and we were going to be really excited about building a company and having traditional employees and insurance and things like that. So, the comment that he made really hit home with me. That's why I made this video, is that he said, we saved almost enough in rent and insurance to justify not having a traditional kind of office situation. And so I'm very grateful that Tim and his company is doing really well. I love the fact that the advice that I'm able to give can be useful to people and that they can make fundamental shifts in the way they're thinking about something. But Tim came to me before he was going to rent the office spaces and hire a bunch of people. And he said, what do you look for in employees, or what are your tips on that? And we're going to do a video on that next. That'll be my next video here today that I'll upload. It's about how to know how to pick employees and things like that. So, but I wanted to, really kind of discuss the idea of minimizing your overall expenses. For every 100,000 you save in expenses every year, you need $1 million less in profit in order, in revenue, in order to be able to have that 10 to 20% in profit end up allowing you to afford whatever that is. So there are a lot of companies out there making, multiple millions of dollars, multi-million-dollar corporations that are squandering hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in expenses that could double literally their profit margin. If you've got a company making $10 million in revenue, and that's $1 million in profit, if they were to cut out $200,000 worth of expenses, then they could increase their profit by 20%. Do you know what a huge impact that would be? That's money that you can reinvest in different ways that will truly matter to the long-term success of the company. So anyway, I appreciate that, Tim. Thanks for the idea, and thanks for all the great feedback on the way you've implemented some of the suggestions that I made. And I look forward to getting together with you either in Rochester or up in DC or whatever when you're there next. And we can get together for dinner. So, all right. Thank you all very much. That's it for this. Again, look at minimizing expenses. For every $100,000 you save, you don't have to make an extra $1 million. Thanks.